Good afternoon from the Hanamichi flower path. It is a Sunday afternoon and welcome to Suleiman's Sunday sermon. I have decided that I want to make these Sunday Hanamichi discussions a kind of reflection of the week, because it's a great way for me personally to try and retain all of the there's a lot of kind of things I've been discussing this week, and wide-ranging movements, very deep ideas, very fascinating people. So there's a whole multitude of ideas and words and concepts that I'm still trying to grapple with and get my head around. And therefore, I spent this morning looking through this week's videos, taking a few notes of things that kind of just appealed to me in that moment, or that things I want to kind of continue exploring more. And I found that to be a very productive exercise, actually, because it's just a way of revisiting this week and instilling some of these like wonderful quotes and things again into my head, and just also as a way of, as I go into the next week, kind of assimilating some of these ideas and putting them together. So I'm really looking forward to this kind of Sunday reflection. These weeks are moving so quickly, months are going to fly by, and I do think it's important to sort of take stock of these like days and weeks, and because otherwise they just sort of disappear into oblivion, and you can't quite remember what was going on or why you thought a certain thing. So anyway, it's in that vein that I've decided to kind of have this Sully's Sunday sermon. And I began this week looking at Klimt because on Monday the 6th of February it was the anniversary date of Klimt's death. So he died on the 6th of February 1918, aged 56. What a monumental year. The end of the First World War. Sheila died that year as well. It was a really significant time. The Spanish flu was what caused the deaths of both Sheila and Klimt. And so I was looking at him, and I asked you a question. I asked you the question which was stimulated by Klimt's quote. I asked you, how do you want people to find out about you? And this actually reminds me that part of why I also want to do this Sunday sermon is because, I ask these questions or things pop up, and I've had some really interesting feedback this week from people who have kind of responded to my question and shared their own thoughts about how they would like to be remembered when all is said and done. And it's nice to engage with people with these kind of questions. And so next Sunday, should there be anyone that kind of has a question or asks me something during the week, I want to try my best to kind of respond to that here, and just so it's like a kind of nice artistic open dialogue, I suppose. And that quote from Klimt was basically him saying, if anyone wants to find out about me, they should look attentively at my work. And he kind of says that there's nothing actually very interesting about me as a person, but if you look into my work, you will see what I am and what I want. So I thought that was a very intriguing thing to read, and took me on a journey that then explored Sheila this week. In particular, I was looking at Sheila and his life in the Viennese capital, Sheila was 20 in 1910, and the beginning of the 20th century in Vienna was a cacophony of conundrums, is all I can call it. You had revolutions, you had the war, you had Spanish influenza coming in that ultimately killed Klimt and Sheila. You had all of this incredible art. You had a conservative bourgeois society, but then you had all this breathtaking beauty and poetry, musicality, the likes of Schubert creating all this wonderful music, Schoenberg too. So you had this kind of real, kind of contradictory elements of kind of darkness and war, and yet beauty and poetry and love. And this was the very time that Sheila was living and creating his works in. So of course that was going to have a huge impact on him and his work. And Vienna was called at this point the modern metropolis, because there was so much building. There was the new opera houses, there was new buildings, the Ringstrasse, this protective circle of public buildings and stately homes. And and what I kind of took from this week's reading in relation to Sheila and the Viennese state was that Sheila really put down his pillars and established himself as an independent artist in the face of what was an extremely stifling, restrictive society at the time. And it's become very clear to me this week that I am, or maybe I have been doing this for a while, but it's only kind of becoming something I'm more conscious of now. I'm very much starting to align myself with artists and creative peoples who have been independent artists. When I look at Kyosai, when I think about Schubert, David Bowie, Yukio Mishima, Klimt, Sheila, Richard Wagner, these are people who were absolutely and unconditionally independent artists and were not prepared to sacrifice anything, any aspect of that. And as I think about what I want to do with relation to my own theatre work moving forward, I do see that as something that's profoundly important to my work, this independent aspect of my work, being able to be in control of those elements that are so important, the writing of the script, the way you stage the event, so on and so forth. That's kind of become a lot more apparent to me, that this kind of the individual and the state, and as a way of understanding expression and what you're trying to present, how you're presenting yourself, and those sort of things is, it's what I've been thinking about a lot. There was a few quotes from Thomas Mann, which I talked about on Tuesday in my video, Why So Serious? And Thomas Mann, this writer, in 1918, wrote Reflections of a Non-Political Man. So I was reading from the prologue of that, and he was saying something along the lines of, I do not think that it's the essence and duty of the writer to join with great fanfare the main direction the culture is taking at the moment. And he's saying, rather than trying to chime in with the general, flow that the particular time and culture is taking, it's far more interesting and far more rewarding to try and get your head around and feel palpably inside yourself, as well as theoretically, the contradictions, the counterpoints, the paradoxes, the counterweights, all of these things that are colliding and crashing against each other, which do take a lot of energy, physically, emotionally, intellectually, to kind of figure out. And this is not always a linear, forward-moving thing. It kind of sends you back and knocks you back. But so I enjoyed reading about that, and learning a bit more as well about Sheila and his love of Kupa, the body, the human figure in particular. And again, I was reminded of, I think it was last Sunday when I shared this quote, but it was an aphorism which Sheila penned at the very end of a letter to his uncle Leopold, I think in 1912, that it pleases me that there are so few people with a sense for art, that evidences again and again the divine in art. It's really, really interesting when I think about the facets of Sheila's work that point to this element of divinity. And this really is not a device or a kind of inflated sense of ego. He genuinely, I think, reveres art to this heightened degree that's almost incomprehensible. You know, he makes it his sole mission to understand himself and how he coexists with the rest of society through his painting and his drawing. And when you look at the self-portraits, like my favourite portrait, the self-portrait with Peacock Coat standing, and you see this almost illuminated halo behind him, this bright white light behind him, you start to get a glimpse of how he sees the pursuit of art as, you know, the most highest form of noble pursuit. And so I'm just trying to get my head around that, and I've been exploring his new stylistic vocabulary, which kind of emerges in 1910 when he's 20 and fresh out of his the Vienna school, which he left after 3 years, and he established the Neue Kunstgruppe and really started to distance himself aesthetically from Klimt, who up until that point he'd been copying meticulously. You know, he'd been copying the kind of decorative, ornamental style of design that had gone into those Klimt works. And Sheila then started to create his own individualistic style, which was a lot more about penetrating through the surface and uncovering the layers of human depth that are beneath the kind of two-dimensional surface. So that's a little bit about what I've been exploring. Again, I will just say that it's really, really, really fascinating for me to kind of engage in questions about this with you, and I'm really thankful to those of you who have kind of come back with questions or shared quotes with me or shared artworks with me as a way of kind of describing your own kind of loves of various artists, because it's well, at the end of the day, it's kind of, these are fascinating human individuals who can bring us so much inspiration and ideas for our own work and projects as we all wander along our own flower paths. And you know, what more can we do but to kind of share our appreciations and use these wonderful, beautiful people as pillars and guides through the nooks and crannies of life. So wishing you all a very beautiful and productive start to the new week, and I shall see you then.